Welcome back Chessbox Worldwide. Get ready for a massive upset from the KCB Open Chess Championship. We are diving into a crucial game where South Sudanese champion Manyok Chaderek Panchol takes on Zambian international master Chitumbo Mwali. The odds are absolutely against Manyok, but he's here to play the game of his life with the brilliant Benoni Defense. This is the center of African chess. Let's meet our players. The man on the black side is IM Chitumbo, known to many as the Copper Eagle. He's the 2006 African Junior Chess Champion, a 5-time Zambian Chess Champion, a 2-time World Cup competitor. Off the board, he's just as sharp, working as an accountant with an SCCA qualification, and he coaches the next generation of players. Across the board, playing white is Manyok Chaderek Panchol. Manyok is the reigning 2021 South Sudan Chess Champion, a title he won decisively with 10 points out of 11 rounds. He is part of the chess playing family, with his younger brother James Panchol being a well-known tactician in the Kenyan chess circuit. Smash that button, subscribe. Let's see how the Copper Eagle handles the heat in this dramatic 1-0 victory. Let the pieces fly. In the white pieces, Manyok played d4 and with a knight f6 from IM Mwali, the Copper Eagle. c4, c5, and after d5, this introduces us to the Benoni Defense. e6, hitting in the center, knight c3, and we see pawn takes d5, and in this position, pawn takes d5 is highly anticipated, but Manyok played knight takes d5, and in this position after knight takes d5 still, pawn takes d5 is highly anticipated, but he played queen d5, maintaining all the pawns in the initial squares, d6 from IM, bishop comes to f4, hitting on the pawn which is on d6, knight c6, intending to go ahead and play the bishop on e6. Manyok played long castling, but however, queen d2 should have been considered. For example, after queen d2, we could have seen bishop comes to e7, rook d1, short castling. The pawn d6 is not free because when you go ahead and take this pawn, the queen always has the check on f5, hitting on the king and also winning the pawn on a2. That's why e3 will be the best continuation. But however, after knight c6, he played long castling. Bishop e6 should have been considered. For example, after bishop e6, would have seen queen comes to e4, pinning the bishop, and after g5, bishop comes to d2, bishop g7. This will be a dominating position for black. But however, after long castling, IM played queen f5, and now we see a3 from Manyok, defending the pawn on a2, bishop e6, queen e4, pinning the bishop, and after queen comes to f4, intending to take the pawn on c4, he played e3, opening up for the bishop to defend the pawn on c4, long castling from IM, and we see queen c2. In this position, queen takes c2 should have been considered. For example, after queen takes c2, we could have seen king takes c2, knight f5, hitting on the pawn which is on c4, b3, and after d5, we could see c takes d5, rook takes d5, rook takes d5, and bishop takes d5, hitting on the pawn on b3. This is a dominating position. After queen c2, he played queen s6, knight comes into f3, h6, intending to go ahead and push all the pawns and dominate the king side. Bishop comes to e2, bishop e7, knight comes to d2, defending the pawn and intending to put the knight on e4 in the future. f5 from IM, and in this position, Manyok played g4. IM played pawn takes g4, queen g6, hitting on the bishop on e6, bishop f6, bishop takes pawn, and queen takes bishop, check, king goes to b8, he played queen f5. Since the king is pinned, the pawn on c5 is a hanged pawn, king a8, moving away from the pin, queen c2, defending the pawn, re-strategizing for the future, knight f5, waiting on the pawn which is on c4, king comes to b1, queen b6, the firepower is still on the pawn and also taking control of all the squares around the king. King comes to a2, defending the b3, intending to go ahead and play knight e4, queen goes to s6, and now we see rook c1, defending the pawn on c4, g5, bishop comes to g3, d5 should have been considered. For example, after d5, you could have seen bishop comes to c7, hitting on the rook and the knight, rook d7, bishop takes f5, queen takes f5, c takes d5, and rook takes d5. This would be a playable position. Bishop g3, he played queen b6, and Manyok played knight e4, hitting on the bishop and the pawn which is on d6. Bishop comes to g7, knight c3, intending to put the knight on d5, a dream square for the knight, queen c6, intending to go on and open and push all these pawns in the future. After bishop taking the knight, which is here on c3, queen d3, and now we see queen b6, queen c2, queen c6, and after b3, he played a6, rook comes to d1, b5, knight d5, centralizing the piece, rook comes to d7, and now we see queen comes to d2, hitting on the knight, and in this position, IM played a positional sacrifice. He played knight takes b3, and after king takes b3, he played pawn takes c4, and the pawn c4 is untouchable. For example, in case of king takes c4, queen b5 would be checkmate. That's why after pawn takes c4, Manyok played king a2, moving away. Now we see rook b8. The rook is coming in and all the squares are being dominated by black. Manyok should have played rook b1, but Manyok played knight c3, but rook b1 should have been considered. For example, after rook b1, we could have seen rook b3, queen comes to f5, dominating all the dark squares, b7, rook takes b3, rook takes b3, and rook d2. This would be a dominating position for Manyok. But however, after rook b8, he played knight c3, and IM played rook comes to b3, hitting on the knight, rook c2, defending the second rank of the king. IM would win the game on the spot. IM went on and played bishop takes c3, but however, d5 was winning the game on the spot. For example, after d5, white has a variety of continuations to play. For example, in case of knight takes d5, this would be winning by far, because after queen f4, so the queen and the rook are hitting on the pawn which is on f3, and in case of knight has to be given back, and after rook takes knight, the queen has no time to take the rook because the rook on c2 will be hanging, and I can tell you this is a winning position for IM. But however, after d5, pawn e4, d4, and after knight comes to d5, queen f4, hitting on the pawn on f3, queen c1, and after rook comes to b7, knight c7 check, king a7, rook comes to d2, c3, and I can tell you black will be winning this position. But however, after rook c2, he played bishop takes c3, rook takes c3, and after queen f4, rook takes b3, queen takes b3 check, and after king a1, IM missed a drawing opportunity in this position. For example, he would have played queen takes a3, and after queen a2 defending from the check, queen c3 check, queen b2 defending the check, queen a5 check, after queen a2, queen c3, and in case of a mistake of playing king b1, this would be lost on the spot, because in case of king b1, rook b7, and IM would be winning the position. That's after king a1, IM played rook b7, and Manyok played the best move. He played queen c1, defending everything, and in this position, IM still could have tried pawn h5, trying to go ahead and win the bishop, but that one would be a slow plan. So he played queen f4, and now we see bishop takes d6, c3 from IM, bishop takes c5, queen a5, and now we see rook d5, queen b5, and now we see rook d8 check. After b8, rook takes b8. It was in this position after move 46 that IM resigned the game and Manyok became the champion. Thank you for watching, and I wish you the best of luck in your games.